Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to I guess, transition from our discussion on emotions to moving on to the comprehensive adjective map. What we've learned about the emotions or the infographics that are available on emotions and the arrangement of emotions is that while they're all very clever and some of them are quite lovely, they're all very useful, all those positive things, consider them said and emphasized. Yet again, they don't map easily onto the change grid. So as far as the actual physical depiction of the arrangement of the emotions we've looked at in what a good couple of dozen different infographics, they just don't lend themselves very easily to overlaying on the change grid. And so this is a very interesting situation in the world of the merging of brilliance, because usually we find maps of humanity, we find models, infographics, whatever category they fall into, that with just a little bit of work can overlay. And so we might need to flip them, we might need to rotate them, we might need to do both. But usually it's pretty easy to get a map of humanity to overlay. Well, that has not been the case when it comes to these, to the emotions. Now, that should not in one way surprise us, because emotions are really adjectives. So, they're words we use to describe how we happen to be feeling or what we happen to be experiencing in our internal environment. And that means that whichever emotion is being triggered or experienced at a particular moment in time is very much dictated by our perceptions of whatever the situation happens to be. And so I think that by just looking at the adjective map, we'll be able to see that it is the arrangement of emotions that connects most readily to these perceptions that we have. And then we can use those great collections of emotions we found in all those infographics as things that we can add to the adjective map. And so that's what I'd like to be able to do in the next couple of calls, at least, is to say, all right, we've got all these emotions. Sadly, they don't overlay all that readily. And so let's see what we can do to repurpose those infographics in a way that will enhance the change grid. And at the same time, that the change grid might be able to enhance people's understanding of emotions and how emotions change, and et cetera, et cetera. So we'll get into all that dialogue as we work our way through this. Now, as far as the subject of emotions go, there's a kind of a situation that gives us the opportunity to bridge between our discussion of emotions and the adjective map. And that has to do with something that Chris Gloss has been going through. So Chris, it's your story to share. I'll let you unmute and share whatever parts of your story you'd like to share with us.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for it, T, and thank you for your email as well, your emails and communication. So last week was one of the toughest weeks of my entire life. I woke up Tuesday morning to a call that my brother was murdered in New Orleans, and that was very traumatic. And then around 8 hours later, my godmother, a lady who helped raise me, died of complications and things she was going through inside the hospital. So, dealing with this situation of the tragedy happened to my brother and how violent his death was, and then a death that we knew that would happen, dealing with those two shades. And so throughout this process, I turned to the adjective map. How interesting, because I wanted to know where grief was, because what I was experiencing, that emotion of grief, but at the same time planning everything for my brother, was pretty far out grid, taking care of all of the arrangements, the funeral, communicating with family members, and having to do that for my godmother at the same time. I was pretty far out grid, but experiencing grief at the same time. So when I saw on the adjective map that grief was plotting, I think at 210, and I was wondering how transient it was, because you can experience grief but feel outgrid at the same time. So I reached out to T to kind of get some understanding about it, and wondered if it was a situation the same as the engagement rings, where you just have different degrees and different shades of it and how it could just move around. And his explanation was amazing, and offered to talk about grief in this session today. So I'm very thankful and grateful for this opportunity.
Well, excellent. And on behalf of everybody, we're very sorry for your loss, Chris. I didn't know that your brother's passing was so violent, and so that adds another layer to the whole discussion we can be having around the grief and the other emotions you're experiencing around this. One of the things that Chris asked me was, as someone progresses through these the stages of adjusting to grief or adjusting to loss, how does that demonstrate itself as far as movement around the change grid? And so I thought maybe we can learn something about the change grid and do something to kind of help support Chris at the same time. So there's a nice pile of us on the call right now. Everyone feel free to unmute and contribute anything you'd like as we work our way through this. But one of the things that Chris sent to me in his first email was that he was having difficulty reconciling grief being very far up grid and all of the anger that he was experiencing around some of the other aspects of the work. Are you the executor of the estate, or are you just the family member who got saddled with making all the arrangements? So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Became the executor of the
There you
estate.
go. Okay, fine,
Right.
right. So even this responsibility was kind of dumped, isn't fair to say, but it like suddenly arrived in your
Yes.
experience, and that's something you'd been thinking about or planning for ages and ages. And so I said, well, a couple of things to keep in mind is that it's very important that we never forget that the change grid is activity specific. So the activity of dealing personally with the grief that he's experiencing over the loss, well, that kind of easily maps to being upgrid, because what's the language of grief sound like? The language of grief sounds like, and very often you'll hear this. In fact, I'll share with you guys that one of my clients early on happened to be a pre-need cemetery. People go like, what the heck is a pre-need cemetery? It's a business where you sell people what their cemetery property is long before they're going to need it, because we very much felt uh, that one of the greatest responsibilities we all have, and one of the great obligations we all have to our family members, is to make our passing as easy on others as we possibly can. So you guys may not be aware of this, but we actually compiled a list of all the decisions that have to be made when a loved one dies. And this was, again, something that I did for Christian Memorial Cultural Center, which was the name of the cemetery. So we compiled a list of well over 100 decisions that need to be made, most of which have to be made within 48 hours of the actual death of the individual. And of those 100 plus, some 90% of them can be pre-planned and prepaid for. So what ends up happening, and Chris, you can share if this is also something that's happening in your experience, is that what we learned very early on was that whoever this person or these people are that are saddled with the responsibility of making all these decisions, many of them happen to be financial decisions. So when you're upgrade, this is not the time to be making the highest quality decisions, let alone the highest quality financial decisions. And so everything became very reactive. People would be making choices that were coming from their heart instead of their head, and all this kind of stuff. Well, the worst part of the whole situation was that this individual who is dealing with all this information is in many ways forced to set aside their own personal grief while they're dealing with business. And that means that all the people that are calling up with good wishes, or back in the day when we would physically get together for funerals and memorial services and things like that, all the comfort that would come with everyone coming together and supporting one another, the individual saddled with all these responsibilities is deprived of that. And so by the time all of the funeral stuff is done and all these decisions are made, this whole support system has gone home, leaving this individual who had to make all of these decisions now grieving on their own. And so it was something we thought was really a very important aspect to our lives as humans. We should also not only be doing planning around our life, but we should be doing planning around what happens when all is said and done. And so, Chris, I don't want to put experiences into your reality that aren't happening, but this pile of work that has been put on you has to put you someplace on the change grid. So you want to share just a little bit about what that workload is like and how you're responding to it?
Yeah, it would be great if all family members were on the same page,
Yeah.
and if the people that had to make the decisions were the same page on the same page. But yeah, the sheer, I guess the only way I could describe it is the sheer workload, a number of tasks that needs to get done. I feel like I'm in multiple places
Yeah.
on the change grid, and gratefully, like the change grid isn't static. So I'm moving in and out of areas depending on what the task is.
Yes.
And since he's in another state, trying to identify where some of these things are, or some of the resources, the people you have to contact, getting the appropriate information adds a level of complexity to it.
Yeah.
And so having to travel there shortly just to continue getting a lot of things done. Some things we're able to get the majority of tasks done outside of there, but yeah, just kind of
Yeah.
feel all over the place.
Yeah. And your situation is far more difficult than, the average person who's dealing with this responsibility, because you probably have a whole police investigation that's going on
Yes.
simultaneously. And they're trying to solve the crime. Supporting you in the process is kind of, I don't want to say peripheral, but it's not central to what they're trying to deal with at that particular point. And so
Yeah.
where does that put you on the change grid? And again, this is a question for all of you that are on the call. When it comes to having to deal now with this pile of work, this pile of responsibilities, where do you think that might put you on the change grid?
Well, it has me out grid
Okay.
for the task that I have to, because like you said, you have to make these decisions in less than 48 hours. So,
Yeah.
no matter how I'm feeling in that moment.
Yeah, and some cultures even less time. Some
Yeah.
cultures want to, they want the whole burial within, but before sunset, it's kind of like what? So, and so Chris is feeling rather outgrid about doing a lot of these sorts of things. Now, in many ways, that's not surprising, because to be upgrid, you have to believe that your ability is very low and the challenge is very high. To be outgrid, you believe that your ability is quite high, but the challenge is also quite high. So probably a lot of the activities that you have to be tackling are things that you definitely know you can do. It's probably more the sheer volume and the time frame around which all this has to be accomplished that might be bringing out some of these outgrid emotions and some of these outgrid adjectives. So, have you ever found yourself just becoming authoritative and directive and in charge?
Yes.
You know, or and gentle it down just a little bit: assertive, brief, decisive, determined. um it's probably, I'm sure there's always moments of humor, but not all. The commanding, enterprising, multitasking. So hopefully all of you on the call can kind of see that a great many of these adjectives would certainly come into Chris's range of emotions and experiences as he's working his way through this. That being said, there's probably, and I know I'm scrolling around, by the way, those of you who don't have this adjective map, I'm happy to supply you with it. Just know that it is a massive size document. If you were to actually try to print out this diagram, it's some 3 feet by 3 feet, a meter by a meter. in order to be large enough to be readable. Is that even a word? Is readable a word? Yeah. But I wanted to do it as an advanced PDF for a couple of very important reasons. So I just want to quickly demonstrate something you may not be aware of. But if I go to the search feature and I type in, well, Bossy is there, and I touch return, it automatically jumps on the illustration to where that word appears. So if you're ever wondering, where does a particular um, adjective plot? So if I put in timid, that throws me over here on the in-grid side of things. And so I wanted something that was very searchable. And so I had to upgrade the level of the Adobe PDF software that this was created in. I also needed to be able to edit it. And usually when you turn something into a PDF, you're stuck with it for the way that it is forever. And we kind of knew that the graphic software that's used to create these sorts of illustrations is going to continue to evolve and change. And we learned the hard way early on that if that software becomes outdated, you may never be able to open the file again. And no exaggeration, a good 3/4 of all of the graphics I've created over all these years, I no longer have the capability of opening. So even if I just wanted to update the strategic framework from MasterStream, I would have to redraw it completely from scratch. So I thought, no, I don't want to do that. Well, luckily, the most advanced PDF software now that Adobe has, I can just click and now I can go in here and I can edit these words. I can add words. I can move things around. I can still output it as a PDF that cannot be edited if I don't want people messing with whatever it is I've created. But I just want you guys to know, if you would like to have this latest, greatest version of the adjective map, just send me a quick email, and I probably have to put it up in Dropbox. I think it's physically too large to email, but at least you'll let me know if you still have it or if you want it, and I'm happy to give it over to you. Okay. Now, continue with what I was saying. I was moving upgrid for a reason. Let me turn this off, otherwise I end up dragging things places. Okay, turn that off, close this. Close this. Yes, now leave it alone. It may very well be that Chris is encountering certain activities that he has to take care of where he's going like, I've got no idea how to do that. I don't know what that's all about. So certain tasks may be putting him up grid. Some tasks may be putting him down grid. What do you guys think? Is it possible that he might even be facing some tasks that have got him down grid? What do you think? I'm trying
Yeah,
to hear you. Thank
yeah,
you. Yeah.
I would think so. Just because he knows how to do them and just wants to delegate them.
Right, yeah, so that puts him a little bit further down grid over here where we would find this whole idea about wanting to delegate something to someone to take care of for us. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, okay, so now his question though to me was also, well, how is it so possible that inside of a given, moment, series of minutes, he can jump from being so far up grid to so far out grid and so far down grid. By the way, down grid could also be because of physical and emotional exhaustion from having to deal with all the sort of stuff. Because obviously, when you're talking about any kind of a grieving situation, it's fair to assume that people may not be eating as well as they should be. They may not be doing the self-care they need to be doing. They may not be sleeping very well. And so sooner or later, these are all going to take their toll on your level of energy and a whole lot of other stuff that goes along with it. So some of that downgrid experience might also just be coming from that exhaustion. And there's also some in-grid sorts of stuff that might be going on. This kind of questioning about whether or not you can actually go on. Or just kind of being in the moment, but not wanting to really be in the moment, trying to disappear a little bit might actually be happening. So, oh, what did I just do? Tell me I didn't mess anything up. Okay. So you'd be all over. And I was reminding Chris that it's very important for all of us to remember that anytime we are in any of the danger zones, the other danger zones are not at polar, what do we say, extremes. They're neighbors. And so if we go to, just one moment, where did I slide it? Where did I put it? Who am I? If we go to the dark side of the adjective map, I'll slide it in for just a second. If we go to the dark side of the adjective map, scroll, 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 flip, 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 look and be amazed. Okay, this is the dark side of the adjective map. These are all 4 danger zones coming together. You can kind of see how it's not all that difficult to go from being grieving in one moment to being dominating and demanding the next. And then maybe be very lethargic, despondent the next moment, and then just be very agreeable and, it's not it's surprising to see how easily one can move from one of these to another when you recognize, remember that these danger zones are actually all neighbors with one another. And what we see as 4 powerless points are all in fact the exact same powerless point. There are just many ways of getting to that place of powerlessness. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Chris, what other questions? Oh, the movement of the stages of grief. And so I'm going to do this as a bit of a quiz for everybody. And you know I can zoom in on this map pretty easily, but I just want to know, where do you think the first stage of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model on grieving, adjusting to death and dying, would put you on the change grid? Anyone remember what the first stage is?
Is it denial?
Denial. The first stage is denial. Where on the grid are you if you are in denial?
Probably a lot of ability.
Say that again.
Probably
Mark?
a lot of perceived ability.
Could be a lot of perceived ability. So you're denying that there are the challenges that really do exist. So you're overinflating your capabilities. Might you also be minimizing them?
Perhaps,
So
yeah.
denying that you have what you have, that you have the ability that you have. I brought that up because I think that denial could actually put us either quite far upgrid or quite far downgrid. So what's the difference between upgrid denial and downgrid denial? What would you guys, how would you characterize the difference between upgrid denial and downgrid denial?
I'm having a hard time describing upgrid denial, but let me take a shot at downgrid. This is
Okay.
Kathy.
Yep.
I'm thinking that the downgrid denial is something that says no big deal. No need. I really don't need to get upset about this, and I really don't need to do anything about it.
Okay. And so one of the ways we've described people that are that far downgrid is they could have their head in the sand.
Yeah.
And so it's the denial, the pretending that X really isn't happening. So, it's denying what should be readily available to you in the facts of a situation. So what about upgrade denial? Anyone want to give that one a shot?
Could it be that it's out of my control, just let it go?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first half of what you said definitely felt upgrid. The thought about letting it go, well, if I'm upgrid, my defense mechanism from survival skills would be flight. Outgrid would be fight.
Well, freeze
and fade would be in-grid or down-grid. And again, by the way, I know I'm asking you guys these questions, but ultimately we're going to get back to what we just shared, and that is that you're on the dark side of the change grid. These things are all neighbors. So they could all be feeling like they're happening, in different areas. But when I think about upgrid denial, I think upgrid denial
delusional.
Yeah, it's kind of like in the moment. You're just kind of going like, no way no way is that a real gun, no way is that tornado actually heading towards me. It's just like you can't believe your eyes. You can't believe what you're seeing. You can't believe what you're hearing, but you do acknowledge that you see it and you hear it. And so to me, the denial is more like an immediate, want to say, an awareness that might be coming from the neurotransmitters we've studied earlier on in our series here, that's just going like, wow, X is happening. That can't be true. That can't really be happening. So it's this kind of like flustered, emotional, I don't even know if denial would be the best word, as much as it's this protest that X even exists, or just total disbelief, suspending all sense of what you would even accept to be happening at that particular moment in time. So one, I think, is kind of wishing that something didn't exist. That's upgrid. And downgrid is pretending it doesn't exist. In either case, it's still kind of denying what's actually happening inside that individual. Now, when it comes to the denial one experiences around the subject matter of grief, what do you think? Is it going to be more like an upgrade, startled, total disbelief? Or is it going to be more of a downgrade? Nope, there's no way that's true. Nope, it isn't happening. What do you think? More of an upgrade or a downgrade denial?
For me, it would be an upgrade denial, but it might not be the case for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's why they can all unmute. They all have the power to unmute and share. So, yeah. Anybody else want to
No,
throw in?
what's the question again, T?
The question is the grief or the denial that is associated with one of the stages of adjusting to death and dying. Is that kind of denial more of an upgrade experience, a total disbelief that X has even happened? Or is it the downgrade denial, which is just pretending it didn't happen, it didn't happen, it didn't happen?
Well, I think it could depend on the person.
Okay. Yeah, feel free to share more. Tell us more about that, or anyone else chime in.
I think also it could depend on the event, because I find myself in two different places dealing with my brother who was murdered and my godmother who passed away from age and other quote unquote natural causes. So
Yeah.
it depends on the event, because one has me feeling wishing it didn't happen, and the other one is more pretending it didn't happen.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and I think it gets down to, are you ignoring it or are you fighting against it?
Mm-hmm.
Very good, Marty. And so upgrade, we'd be fighting against it.
Yeah, that's what I'm sensing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then downgrade, we're trying to avoid it one way or another, obviously because we find it unpleasant to acknowledge it exists. So it's true, if we look at Chris's godmother, and again, Chris, don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's sad that she passed, but it wasn't fully unexpected because of her age or whatever she was dealing with. And so nobody wants to go like, oh yeah, she passed away. But that's a very different call to receive than your brother has been murdered. Because then you want to go like, what, no way, what are you talking about? Chris, did that connect?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel exactly there. And I like that comment about fighting and ignoring it. I think that's on point.
Right. Okay, and so, sticking to Kubler-Ross's model, anyone know offhand what the next stage you move into after denial?
Pissed off.
Bargaining?
Exactly. Well, no, but it's being pissed off. It's anger is the next one. Yeah, anger, getting pissed off. So now anger, again, it is a powerless point emotion. So sometimes it puts us up grid, but the more we've talked about this in recent weeks, the more what I want to do is move angry from up grid to out grid. The difference is that, well, we talked about that before, we don't need to do it again, but the tone of the anger, and I don't really mean the verbal tone of it, but the feeling tone of it is different. So when I'm outgrid and angry, I'm angry at people. I'm angry at the situations. Where upgrid anger, I might be angry with myself for not being prepared for whatever might be heading my way. So at some point, I want to kind of move anger over here. In fact, maybe I'll go ahead and see if I can actually figure out how this whole thing works. So if I take you and I go copy and paste, oh, there's my grocery list. We'll just delete that. So yeah, no, we'll just delete that. We'll just
Always edit your grocery list.
You know, I need to. I really do need to. It was so funny. I thought I was projecting the adjective map when we first got started. Nope, I was projecting my grocery list. So there you go. Okay, well, I'm going to add angry over there at some point in time. So now we think about, though, the anger that someone feels associated with the death of a loved one. What's the content? What's the conversation? What's that anger all about? Who's it directed towards? Thoughts about
Probably
that?
the person who died
Could be angry with them.
or the person who killed them if it was
Well, yeah,
murder.
yeah, yep, 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 yep.
I think it's angry at the fact that you can't change it.
Yep.
Yeah, very frustrated because you figure, like, you know, you think you should have the ability to do this. You know, it's super challenging. I mean, to end up outgrid, you have to have the thought that your ability is really high, but something or someone is interfering with you. So if they would just get in line, if they would just do, or if they would just not have done whatever, then you wouldn't be as PO'd as you are this far outgrid. And yeah, now I think in Kubler-Ross's model, the anger is directed towards the individual who passed. So how could you leave us? How could you do this to us? What do you know? Why didn't you X, Y, Z? So that kind of languaging, I think, is
What
what's
about anger, the entire human condition?
Well, I'm sure there's part of that is as well. And certainly in Chris's situation, he's got to be angry about a whole bunch of things surrounding this whole situation. But as far as the grieving process goes, that anger is about, the person who left, the circumstances that you've now been left in, etc. Okay, so again, his question was, how do they map? Well, that would mean that at a certain point in time, your grieving process is going to move you from being quite far upgrid to being quite far outgrid. Now I'm saying that, but again, realize I don't think that he moved through all the healthy response states on his way. I think these things are neighbors, and he just moved from being in this upgrid triangle to this outgrid triangle.
Mm.
So they're neighbors. Okay, what's the third stage?
Is it bargaining?
That's bargaining. So what's bargaining all about? Anyone know what bargaining is all about?
Well, that's if I quit smoking now, I won't have lung cancer, or I'll be saved.
Yep. It's about trying to find some part of what has been lost and still being able to hang on to it. So they would say that part of the bargaining, the way bargaining demonstrates itself in adjusting to death and dying, is people hanging on to objects that the other person had that remind them of that person. And it's one thing to have one or two mementos. I don't think that's their whole point, but to create a shrine, to close off the room and, never allowing them to leave it all untouched for decades to come. This is bargaining, getting stuck into the bargaining kind of phase. The thought being that I'll make you a deal, God. I'll do this if you'll do this, if you'll bring them back, if you'll whatever. the case may be. So bargaining comes into that. Now, do you guys think that bargaining is an upgrade kind of a behavior? Is it an outgrid behavior? Where on the change grid would you actually need to be to bargain? What, I mean, what's involved? What's the mental process associated with bargaining?
You're taking action, you're taking definitive action probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's outgrid.
There's
No,
some
it's outgrid.
analysis going on.
Yeah, there's analysis going on. We're somewhat outgrid. I don't think we're in the danger zone. In fact, we've probably said, well, all this anger isn't changing much of anything. Maybe I need to move a little bit more in grid, but I start looking at these words. And I know they're trying to be insightful. Maybe they're trying to be, I'm trying to see where negotiating fits on the change grid. It's probably one of the more downgrid things. Enterprising, cogent, reserved, specific. Yeah, you're not this far. It's not unemotional. It's not unswerving. There's a lot more going on. What did I just do? Oh no. I have to leave that capability before I screw up the diagram altogether. No. Try to think what else is around here. Upgrade, we'd have clever, influential. That doesn't feel like that's what's happening. I think it's about trying to make a deal with God. So definitely a little bit more on the in-grid side of things. I'm making myself a note here. Maybe we need to add what adjective would be useful to describing someone who's in this bargaining sort of a state. Negotiable? That's a little bit more negotiating. We get down a little bit further. Practical, reserved. And then we're getting to be a little bit too far down grid.
What about
Is it
persistent?
I was
influencing?
just going to say persistent.
Persistent, influencing. Is persistent on there? Did you guys see it as I was scrolling around?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is
it's
at
right
9.5.
there.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, just so you guys, if you haven't looked at the change grid, the adjective map for a long time, each one of these blocks of words has as its address the coordinate pair immediately to the left. So we would say that persistent is at 9.5. The truth is that persistent could be something that would apply in all of these areas around it. But because when we're placing adjectives on the adjective map, we have to say, well, where's it going to go? Well, we use the coordinate pair to the left to describe this block of words. So that's at 9.5. Yeah, persistent. Yeah. Self-contained.
How about like deliberate, logical?
Yeah, you're certainly trying. Yep. Now that's interesting because now we're getting close to frustrated. 12 and 6 on the change grid is a very interesting spot. So think about this. So you guys can make a connection when you're with your own life to it. Imagine for just a moment that on the ability scale, you're a 12 for whatever the activity happens to be. So maybe even in your whole career, you'd say, I've achieved 12. I mean, I am an absolute master of whatever it happens to be. But you find the activities themselves to only be moderately interesting on a good day. And so engagement is very much slipping. You are moving down now into, if you look where that's plotting, you're moving down now into power apathy. And so when you see words like frustrated, hostile, insubordinate, resentful, sarcastic, where are those coming from? Well, the description we've often used for frustrated is that, or this coordinate pair is that you're feeling frustrated and resentful, a feeling of being held back by people or situations, sometimes even feeling as though you're being punished because you have such high ability to do something. Whoever's in charge is just saying, you're so good at it, we'll just give that to you for the rest of forever. and you're kind of going like, wait, this is underutilizing my ability. So at a certain point in time, you start to move further, you become very frustrated, etc. But one of the ways people have of moving on from that is to move further down grid, where they just kind of throw up both hands and go like, well, fine, whatever. That's great. I know how to do it, but you can kind of see how it progresses. And so when I think about the bargaining that's going on, some of this does come into play. It's blaming, pragmatic, um, productive, exacting, organized. Now, Marty, which one did you suggest?
It was, I don't think I suggested any of those.
Okay, give me
Yeah,
another.
I was thinking on, it was probably a little bit more on influencing.
Oh, well, and so maybe that's vigilant. Um, as I start to move around here, I do start to get a little bit more pitching of things.
Yeah, in my mind, influence kind of has a little bit more energy around it. But there could
Yeah.
be kind of a subtle influence. I don't know. Could be a little
Well,
bit more.
yeah, people downgrade do become quite passive aggressive.
Yeah, it could be the passive aggressive influence. You might be
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
they're still trying to kind of move you around. Like sarcasm, I think, is an attempted influence.
Yeah.
And so, some of these things, wary, critical. So, it feels like we're kind of down here. Now, again, just to connect this back to the key question, where does bargaining live? Well, look, if I was going to be bargaining with a living person and, we're negotiating with a client about XYZ, I would say, look, everybody, that's much further upgrade.
Right.
That really is, yeah, there's an analytical element to it, but there's some salespersonship that's involved. And, you got to be pitching it. You got to be courageous. You got to be all that. No, we are bargaining in this particular situation with unseen forces. And I have to believe that at the same time we're doing these bargains, we kind of don't really expect that the bargain is going to be successful. Um, you get the idea, you know what I'm saying? I don't want to diminish what that bargaining is really all about, but I just want to say the person who's in the midst of bargaining knows that it's a bit late to be changing much of anything. We can't bring back the individual. So,
They're throwing
so
it out there, but nothing's going to happen.
right. And so they're doing it as a little bit more of a way of a coping sort of a thing, maybe as a way to help make peace with whatever they're doing next. But anyway, that's what I learned. So bargaining, in fact, it is by bargaining, the person is willing to concede the outcome, but attempts to do so by squeezing a few more moments of normal out of the turmoil that pounds on life's door. Whoever wrote that very well. The individual is clinging to the threads of hope, however thin and worn the fabric may be. Isn't that well written? Oh, I like that. Yeah. And so I think that's what we're talking about. That's kind of here. It is this idea about letting go, but at the same time, just kind of going like, is there something else that can persist? Is there something else that one way or another I can keep neat and orderly and tidy? Is there something there that I can, you know, grab hold of? So I think to go back to the main thing here, we started off upgrid. We moved outgrid when anger came into play. Well, now I think we're starting to move downgrid, but maybe even we're moving a bit more in grid, a little bit of a healthier sort of a way of looking at it. So, and I don't know, these different stages take different times for people, and everyone's going to go through it at their own rate. But I think that the person is kind of and again, you guys feel free to chime in, but do you think they're kind of trying to move out of this very dysfunctional, very um, um, dark side of the chain grid sort of state and go like, okay, come on, we got to move on. I need to move on. I need to let, life continue. So I do feel like there's a little bit of an in-grid sort of a movement that's happening as well. I would like to say more of a mid-grid maneuver, more of a PowerPoint maneuver, getting to that place of balance and peace and harmony. But I think we got a ways to go before we'd end up there. Okay, so far is this resonating with people?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think my takeaway really though, T, is what you said is it's all over the map. I mean,
Yeah, it
it's
is.
everywhere. It's
It is.
everywhere.
It is. It's all over. But as we move along, this is why I was kind of going like the stages. The reason why we're going through stages of grief is because our perceptions are changing around that situation. And while it may feel very insensitive to say this when the loss is so fresh, we have all experienced loss at some point in our life, and we know that time heals all wounds. Most wounds might leave a big scar, but nevertheless, we may actually, or we will actually come to a day when the whole day goes by and we might not even be thinking about that particular situation that was so traumatic. It might just end up becoming something that's just part of what our life story is, as opposed to being the central focus of our life story in that particular moment. You guys can relate to that? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so I do feel like the reason why these things move is because perceptions are changing. That's the only way I can move on the change grid, is because my perceptions have changed. And if Brian was on the call, I'd be saying, I'm sure there's also a neurochemical element at play too. How long can you experience high levels of epinephrine or adrenaline before your body just says, I can't handle more of this? Okay. I'm exhausted. So you done tuckered me out. And so I think that's elements in there as well, because sooner or later we understand we're humans. We are creatures with physical limitations. That doesn't mean we can't accomplish great things, but maybe not all at once, all in one day. All right. Now, the next stage we move through is depression. Where is depression on the change grid? Tends to be more
Down and
more
yeah.
down grid. And when I'm talking about down grid depression, I really am talking about true physical depression. In fact, I think if we looked up their definitions of depression, one of the things they would say is that the neurochemicals have now been depressed. Many physical and emotional systems that we experience as humans have all been depressed. So levels of serotonin have been depressed. Levels of whatever else might help us feel good, depressed, have left us depressed, etc. So when I think of depression, I think it has a very strong physical element to it, in addition to whatever the story is that's accompanying that depression. Um, you guys have anything you want to add to what I've just shared there as far as depression goes?
Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, well, and then so as I've shared others, I'm one of these people who I have no hesitation at all sharing with the whole world what my personal experience with depression and anxiety has been. It has been part of my life since I was a child. But my depression is lacking content or context. I'm not depressed about anything. There's nothing going on that I should be feeling anything negative about at all. But I do know that this depression is something that is very physical for me and has happened always. It's always there. And so when I think about that, well, if you want me to try to come up with some sort of story to explain why I'm depressed, for many years I tried to do that and got very good at it. But then you get to a certain point where you just kind of go like, no, there is no content. It's just my chemistry. And one moment. I shared with you guys on the last call that I had taken a DNA test to determine what the best medication would be for my depression, my anxiety. And as it turns out, the one that I've been taking and actually doing rather well on is not ideal for me. And so we decided we're going to switch to one that's on the ideal list. Well, that means I have to taper off the old one before I can move on to the new one. And so I can tell you that today I didn't physically get my body out of bed until 3 minutes before this call began.
Wow.
So I am really having a very, what I want to say, challenging transition, because now I'm down to quarter dose and then I'll go off altogether because it has to wash. So these next few days, I know are going to be what they're going to be, but there's no content around it. It's just my chemistry. And so I bring that up just to say that I think a lot of the depression that individuals might be experiencing around the loss of a loved one could just be their hopefully short-term experience of what I consider just be part of who I am. And so there is this physical exhaustion that comes along with it. There is this, I guess I'll just say, chemical sort of thing that's going on as well. But in their particular case, they have content readily available to them to explain why they're feeling depressed. And I think that's what a normal person has, someone who doesn't have any kind of underlying issue with depression or anxiety. They get depressed about something, and sooner or later that depression passes because that something has evolved into whatever the next learning experience, whatever happens to be. So they move on from it. They have actual content. And that's different, obviously, than what the situation is as I'm describing for myself. Okay, anything else you might want to add about the depression that people have around the loss of a loved one? No?
PT,
Yeah.
I know we're coming close to time, but how does that relate to the numbness with the grief? The depression is numb. How is being numb related to those two?
Well, that's interesting because I know we have at least one physician on the call, but I could certainly say that when you're talking about the physical impact of depression, it does affect sensory experiences as well. And so you may be feeling numb, but numb is usually this feeling of being frozen in a space, and that is the escape route of the person who's very far downgrid. Freeze is the downgrid survival skill. So frozen, numb, I think those kind of go together, and I think a lot of it is just the physical side of things. Jane, you're a physician. Anything you want to add to that? Alfred, you're a physician. Anyone?
Well, I think just disconnection from your thinking and your body, between your thinking and your feeling self, leads to numbness.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you shut down your thoughts, or you can't think about anything anymore.
Yeah. In fact, I'm trying to remember the name. If you guys revisited the Merging of Brilliance, the kind of white paper article thing I wrote, it's up online. But I try to look at all these models. Well, one of the most recent ones, and I forget their name, I want to say Eastman, but I don't believe that's right. They talk about load shedding and how it connects to the amount of activity you have going on in your system. So their whole point is that as your level of activity increases, as your level of tension increases, the number of things you can simultaneously juggle automatically reduces. You're shedding the load, and ultimately you become transfixed on only one thing. Now, again, that sounds like it's very far upgrid, but we know that very far upgrid and very far downgrid are, the same general vicinity. So they do talk about how many different things can one juggle. And one of the things they say is that under a tremendous amount of pressure, you may be able to juggle absolutely nothing. that you just don't have the bandwidth, the capacity, the energy to be looking at anything in that particular moment in time. And until you can recharge your battery, you won't be able to do anything around that. And so that to me also sounds like, feels like that could be one of the ways that numbness might be used as there. Now, I did a search. Numb is not on the is not on the adjective map. Maybe we need to add that one. So, yeah, Chris. Okay, so any other thoughts? Numbness, where would numbness live on the change grid? Doesn't feel out grid.
No, definitely not.
No, doesn't really feel up grid. It kind of feels like the aftermath of being up grid for too long, too hard. Could be in grid. Definitely down, feels down grid. So again, it's one of those things that's on the dark side of the adjective map. And so it's readily available to anyone at any of these extremes. All right, and then that leaves us with the last one, and that's acceptance. So where does acceptance kind of put you on the change grid? Where would you need to be on the change grid to simply accept things as they are?
It's got to be the PowerPoint.
That would be the PowerPoint, the center of the change grid. And so let's see if I can find a good graphic to show what we've just been talking about. Probably this one. We start off very much out of balance because things happened that threw us out of balance. And we go from that up-grid imbalance to that out-grid imbalance, from denial to anger. And then we start to try to move ourselves in grid a little bit. If you think about the adjective map, those things we were looking at around bargaining, we're right around here, kind of the driven analytical, which makes sense, trying to, come up with some set of circumstances under which you can get your way, whatever that means. And then you end up yet again further down grid, but over the course of time and doing careful, work on self and tapping into resources around you, your goal is to be able to move yourself to that center of the change grid. This is the place of true acceptance. Acceptance without condition. It's not like, yeah, but, no, it's just yes. X is true. So isn't that interesting that if we try to map it, we spend time all around this red circle, this problem with second degree and third degree imbalance. Come in a little bit, by then we're exhausted, and then we can recover and come back. So I think the question really that's interesting to look at is, well, is there a case to be made for putting energy into expediting the process? Or is the real learning allowing ourselves to simply go through our process, whatever that process may be? What do you guys think? Speed it up? Allow it to be? What do you do?
I would argue that you can't speed it up, that it needs to take its toll. It needs to take its place.
It needs its time to do whatever.
I-
Are you guys in agreement with that? Yeah.
I would say it's also not linear.
Yeah,
force
right.
forward, you have to go backwards, then you go forward. It is unique to
Absolutely.
everybody.
Well, absolutely. Go ahead.
Try to speed it up too much, it'll backfire and it will come out again at at another place.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
It'll
yep.
boomerang and keep going.
Well, and certainly we all understand things like anniversary reactions that people have. That's pulling you right back into the story. And certainly in the case with the loss of Chris's brother, I have to believe that as the legal side of things unfolds, whatever that's all going to involve, assume there's going to be investigations and trials and all this sort of stuff. All that's just going to bring all of this back to top of mind, back to the forefront. And so to Marty's point, I think, yeah, you can easily be moving in and out of these things forward and backwards, but ultimately the goal is to get to that. Now, I brought that up only for one reason, and that is that we do have a lot of people that provide coaching services around the subject of adjusting to loss. And as I talked to them about this over the years, I was trying to find the recording to point you guys to, but they said, you really can't do much about those first 4 stages. You have to allow them to be what they are. But we can become useful to people as they move from depression back into acceptance. How can we help them through coaching, through counseling, through whatever sort of developmental opportunities we may bring to the public? What can we do to help people move from depression up into acceptance? And I thought that could be useful. Now, my other reason for bringing it up, and I know our time is up, so this is just setting the stage for Thursday's call, is that, well, Chris has suffered something that is dramatic and horrific in many, many ways. This pattern of adjusting to loss is not limited to the loss of an individual. It can be to the loss of an ideal, to the loss of a dream, to the loss of whatever words you might want to describe, that about a week from now, we're going to start to see come to the forefront. So this election, however it turns out, is going to end up with a lot of people going through whatever this grieving process might be. And they will go through these 5 steps. And by the way, there's other models that even talk about finer steps that people will move through, but there'll be denial, and then there'll be anger, and then there'll be maybe some bargaining, and then there'll be depression. And sooner or later, life needs to go on, and relationships need to be healed, and whatever it is that needs to be done for society to operate in a what do I say, in a correct sort of way, we got to get back to this center of the change grid. And that's where we could serve a very valuable role, if nothing else, at an individual level with our friends and family members, maybe with our neighborhoods. Maybe we can be called upon to try to facilitate people's adjustment to whatever that outcome happens to be. So I understand people are going to have whatever their reactions are, but sooner or later, we need to help people move towards acceptance of one another, acceptance of whatever a new reality may be, etc. So thoughts about that? Edie, you unmuted?
You know what? Yeah. And this is just that people can move into acceptance immediately. I see acceptance often as an exhaustion when people are up grid and very stressed out. And United, what is it? United 91, 93, 9/11. And whenever there's a plane crash or like the towers, the last thing was that people have a state of calm when they say, I just want you to know I love you. They're going to die. They're so dang stressed out. There's not a dang thing they can do. Off
Right.
grid, powerless, and they go to immediate state of the PowerPoint and by going into acceptance. I just had to point that out.
Well, I think you're right, particularly, going back to Chris's situation with his godmother. If, I mean, and Chris, you're still unmuted, but if the family can go and visit her frequently and can say what they need to say and hear what she needs to say to them, and, they can help her process through whatever her own thoughts are around the end of life and all that, that's a very different situation. I can see how that could move me from up grid because I had a loss to the middle of the change grid because we know she's in a better place, But if it's sudden, unforeseen, unexpected, yeah, that's very interesting. Chris, thoughts about that? Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's the dynamic I'm experiencing and weaving in and out of emotions. And even through these different stages, I feel like I'm just weaving in and out, being torn between the 2 scenarios, right?
Yeah,
So it's like one is pulling me this direction, the other is pulling me this direction. And so I find myself at times, like you mentioned, where I just freeze and just stand still because both of them have a strong tug, but I'm limited in what I can do in that particular moment. But I remembered Kathy and her messages on breathing. And so what I would do is just pause and just breathe and then move forward.
Yep. Well, and from Native American teachings, one of the things that I was told as a child is that if there are 2 losses that occur quickly, it's because the second loss needed to go help the first loss.
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
your godmother is busy right now. So there you go.
Mhm.
All right. Well, Chris, we'll keep you in our hearts, keep you in our thoughts, our prayers. And so on Thursday, I'd like to get back into the adjective map, talk about putting some of these adjectives we describe or these emotions in proper places on the change grid. But again, I think we really want to start thinking about how are we going to help our civilization recover, our society, or recover, starting about a week from now.
T, I just
Yes.
wanted to share one quick thing. I
Mhm.
was so inspired by the stuff that we did on bias a few weeks ago that I was writing an article. I wrote an email to my family sharing some of the the online resources.
Mhm.
And my brother said, you should write an article about that. So I changed it into an article and I published it yesterday on LinkedIn.
And that's what you've chatted over to all of us. So all of you guys take a look at the chat window,
I chatted
and,
away.
and there's a link there that you can get to. Yeah.
It's my first LinkedIn article I've published, so I was excited.
Yeah. Now, one thing I need to do is you chatted that to the panelists. That's only to me. So
Oh,
we need to, you need to send the same thing. Well, I've already done it. So let me just click on here. So everybody, if you look at your chat window for just one moment, panelists and attendees. No, why does it keep wanting me to get salsa? See, okay. Nope, Jane, looks like you got it. You got to cut and paste it.
okay.
Yeah. Huh.
There you
Yeah,
go.
there you go. Alrighty. Okay, good. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining in. We'll pick up where we left off on our next call. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.